Have the Tories closed down the Downing Street betting scandal, or is there more to come? And as small boat crossings reach a record high, we ask, do the parties have a credible plan? Hello, welcome to Newsnight for your weeknightly interviews and insight. Interviews with the Conservatives' Gillian Keegan and Labour's Jonathan Ashworth coming up. Let me introduce you to your panel this evening. We have former Universities Minister, Conservative peer Lord Joe Johnson. Alongside him, we have Mhairi Black, former SNP MP, and she was their Deputy Leader at Westminster. And we have Professor Sir John Curtis, who needs no introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway, elections guru. Welcome all of you. Nick is here as well. I'm going to ask you all to take a look at this clip. Have a look over there.
2 weeks out from the Olympics, and if we are competing against the Conservative Party, my teammates and I would be saying they are a shower of shit. And if one of my teammates got caught for cheating, they'd be dead to me. That abuse of trust is unforgivable.
Joe Johnson, what do you think of that response to the betting scandal compared to, say, the Prime Minister's?
Well, he's still recommending that people vote Conservative, I think, at the end of that clip, which is a bit puzzling because it's an odd introduction to a message which is about Conservative values. But
I should say, by the way, that's James Cracknell. He is a Conservative candidate, for those who hadn't realised.
But what I think he is voicing is the immense frustration of all candidates and activists that this story is still rumbling on 2 weeks now since it first broke, and shows every sign of continuing, because Number 10 hasn't managed to get to the bottom of it, hasn't really flushed out exactly who may have been involved or not, and dealt with it.
How would you close it down then? If you were advising Rishi Sunak, what would you tell him to do?
He's got to take very firm action, and clearly no one can understand why people haven't been suspended when in comparable situations others might have been. So I think there is a need for firm, decisive action, and I don't think they've yet seen that.
John Curtis, is this cutting through to voters now?
Well, voters are certainly noticing the story, but we have to bear in mind that it's a story that perhaps reminds them of the already rather critical view of the operation of 10 Downing Street by the Conservative Party since 2019, and not most obviously with respect to the way in which 10 Downing Street seemed to have a more liberal interpretation of the COVID regulations during the lockdown, and now we discover they seem to have a rather more liberal attitude towards perhaps, and it's only an allegation, gambling on the basis of information to which only some were privy. But insofar as, therefore, it is a reminder rather than new information, we perhaps should not be surprised that the 3 polls that have come out today, which are really the first polls to be conducted since the revival of this story over the course of the weekend, actually all 3 of them have absolutely no change in the Conservative vote.
Really?
And to that extent, at least, it is not clear, so far at least, that the story is necessarily reducing a Conservative, which one has to say is already so low that it is very, very difficult to see it falling much further.
What do you think of that? What do you think of that? That it's not, so far at least, not going through to voters?
It surprises me. I mean, is it possible, John, that the Conservative vote would be a bit higher in the absence of this betting scandal?
Well, all I can say to you is, Joe, is given that so far the trajectory of the Conservative vote during this campaign has been gradually downwards, actually having 3 opinion polls in which your vote holds steady might be regarded as a relatively good performance.
Gosh. Mhairi Black, how does this scandal compare to recent SNP scandals?
So I think, I mean, obviously the SNP have had quite a tumultuous year, if you can put it that way. But I mean, the most recent thing, I assume you're talking about the stamps, the story that's been going around. And I mean, I'm grateful that doesn't appear to be any actual evidence that anything has happened there, but it's not good for any political party to be going into a campaign, you know, with question marks over themselves. But I'm grateful that it's not on the scale of, say, COVID contracts or such.
For those who aren't up to speed and want to learn more about the stamps issue, Nick?
Yes, well, John Swinney, the First Minister, he was talking about it on the Laura Kuenssberg show yesterday. And essentially what he's saying is those stamps are allowed for campaigning, but what they're not allowed is for use in a general election campaign. I think I've understood that correctly. And he has consulted his party. He's spoken to people in the party, and he has been given assurances, and he knew he had to get good assurances before he went on Laura's show, that nothing untoward had happened in terms of using those for general election purposes. That's what the First Minister said.
But I think we can at risk of exaggerating the relative importance of the allegations about the SNP with respect to the demise of the Conservative Party. In the case of the Conservative Party, their difficulties clearly start with Partygate. In the case of the SNP, their difficulties predate the revelation that the police were actually going so far as to arrest Peter Murrell, Nicola Sturgeon's husband, and then there was subsequent arrests. The problem for the SNP starts with the leadership contest that Nicola Sturgeon instigated in the February of last year. During that leadership contest, SNP support fell by 5 points. And I think the SNP's problem is much more to do with it as a political institution, its record in government, the leadership is now able to offer, rather than necessarily the various allegations that some people might regard as a degree of scandal.
OK. In terms of what Joe Johnson was saying, that Downing Street need firm action to somehow close this down, is that going to come? I mean, how are they handling it?
Well, so far, no. And essentially, I mean, the Prime Minister was asked about this again this evening on the Harry Cole Sun debate this evening, and he's essentially saying the Gambling Commission is looking into this. As James cleverly said on the BBC yesterday, the Gambling Commission have told us, the Conservative Party, that we can't talk about it, and therefore we cannot act, because to do so would prejudge. But there are instances where there are allegations that are made when there are MPs, and they will have the whip taken off them. So the nearest parallel will be, well, why are they not suspended as a candidate, as the Labour did with their candidate in the Rochdale by-election? The problem with that is you can't change the ballot paper, so it'll still have their name and it will still say the Conservative Party. But that's why they're not acting. But there are a number of people in the Conservative Party who are saying we need much, much firmer action, because they say this is looking weak.
How would you describe this scandal?
Well, it's catastrophic in terms of public confidence in politics, in the sort of the priorities of people engaged in it, and I can see it gradually hemorrhaging Conservative support to the extent it hasn't already leached away over the course of the last few weeks. So decisive action needs to be taken rapidly if they're going to salvage anything from the last 10 days of this campaign.
And do you know what's interesting, Vic, is that the Conservatives clearly entered this campaign in what John would probably describe as a structurally challenging situation after 14 years in power and all that's gone with that. And then it is bookended at the beginning with D-Day, which is clearly a personal failing by the Prime Minister. And then towards the end of the campaign, we have something that looks like a potential corporate failing that plays in, as John said, to all those allegations on public.
But this is what happens to parties' election campaigns. The weaknesses that they've exposed in office during the last 4 or 5 years often arise again to election campaigns. So think about the Conservative Party in 1997, whole row about Neil Hamilton, arguments about sleaze, which of course had been a leitmotif of John Major's regime from 1992 to 1997 and caused an awful lot of difficulties. Surprise, surprise. These stories get picked up again during the election campaign. And in a sense, it's probably true that if Partygate had never happened, this gambling story might have got a bit of attention, but it wouldn't necessarily have the legs it has. It has the legs because it seems to be part of a wider narrative.
Well, that's exactly what I'm viewing when I see it, is politics is often about perception and no more than when you're in the middle of an election campaign. And the same is true of course, any political party, but particularly the Conservatives, given the level and the amount of scandals that have happened over their tenure in the last, say, 4 or 5 years. I think it's exactly that. It's playing into a muscle memory within the public.
OK. Well, this evening, the Prime Minister, as Nick said, Rishi Sunak, and the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, were interviewed in front of an audience of Sun readers. They were questioned about tax. They were questioned about people crossing the Channel in small boats, amongst other things. Afterwards, I spoke briefly to the Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan, before she dashed off for another interview. And I asked her why the Prime Minister hadn't withdrawn support from those Conservative candidates who are being investigated by the Gambling Commission for alleged illegal betting on the timing of the election.
Well, I guess it's because there is a gambling commission, and obviously you need to see what they say. I mean, normally you would wait till due process has taken its course, and then you would take decisions. I mean, the key thing, I guess, is who knew what when. I mean, that's what the gambling commission will be.
So the Prime Minister could literally ask Craig Williams and the candidate in Bristol.
Well, he answered that, didn't he? He answered that very clearly and said, look, You know, there was a process, they were going on with it. Also, there was an internal process as well.
So has he asked them now already?
Well, I don't know, because I haven't been there, but he answered that very clearly.
Because it could take 5 minutes, couldn't it, to find out?
Well, I mean, you know, the guy said that, one of them has said that he's placed a bet, but the whole thing is not placing a bet, is whether there is insider knowledge, or, you know, that he knew about, or whether it was based on a rumour or not. Yeah. So, but I think he answered that quite clearly. I mean, the most important thing for the country, this issue, you know, will be come and gone like many other issues. The most important thing for this election is who you choose to be your next Prime Minister, and who's got the plans to deal with,
and who you trust, exactly.
Yeah, and who's got the plans to deal with the difficult situation that we still face.
I mean, everyone will remember that when Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister, he stood on the steps of Downing Street and talked about running a government with integrity, professionalism and accountability. Under his premiership, other Tory MPs have been suspended. Mark Menzies in April this year after allegations he misused campaign funds, after he made a late-night phone call to pay off some bad people. Lee Anderson was suspended under Prime Minister Rishi Sunak in February after claiming Sadiq Khan was under the control of Islamists. Another Tory MP, Scott Benson, was suspended last April. So he did it then, but not now. Why?
Well, look, there's more than 350 MPs, and it really, for someone like me, you would pick out, obviously, some bad cases of people who've done the wrong things, and then they've been dealt with once their facts have come to light. But all across the country, every day, there's MPs like me, Conservative MPs, working their best for people, and you never hear about the other 350.
Well, if you're saying that you're somebody who's working their best, working their hardest for people, would you campaign for those two candidates then?
I'd campaign for candidates. I mean, at the moment we're all campaigning for ourselves.
Sure, but would you spend Conservative campaign money, resources and time
in
my
those
decision.
areas? That is a decision for the Prime Minister, and it's a decision for the campaign.
Okay, well, let me ask you personally. Would you go to those two areas and campaign for those candidates?
I would always want due process to be done. If I was accused of anything, or if anybody else was, I would always want due process to be done.
Right, so now, would you... So you're a straight talker. You're a straight talker. So is it yes or no?
The question. I would want due process to be done first. I would never sit there.
But if due process doesn't conclude till after the election, would you campaign now for them?
Due process has to be done. Yeah, you have to be fair. You can't be judge and jury.
So
it's not the journalist.
No.
It's not the journalist's role. It's not my role to be judge and jury. There's other people who do have that role, and they should do that job. And hopefully they can do it quickly as possible. Okay. And what they'll be trying to work out is who knew what when.
Just to check, you didn't put a bet on the date of the election?
I didn't know. No, I didn't know.
Do you know anyone who did?
No, absolutely not. No.
The Prime Minister tonight said Labour would put up people's taxes. The Conservatives would put up people's taxes in the next Parliament, won't they?
No, but what we've said differently is, in terms of the spending,
I'm going to pause you right there, if I may, Ms Keegan. The Conservatives would put up taxes in the next Parliament. That is true.
It is not. So we have said we will reduce taxes, and of course when you're talking about taxes, you can talk about the overall tax take, you can talk about taxes on working people, you can talk about taxes on pensioners. So we've said for average working people we will introduce another tax.
So I'm talking about tax take. I'm talking about the tax take.
Okay, so that includes everything. That includes businesses.
So they're going up.
I mean, literally, what we've focused on is the impact on working people, trying to make sure that we reduce the taxes for working people and we do not tax state pension. So that's
the tax take. The IFS today showed calculations that mean total taxes as a share of GDP will rise under the Conservatives' plans. That is correct.
Well, I'll look at those calculations. It says shared as GDP, and it will take into account, I guess, what they're forecasting GDP to be, which is growing, and also what they're forecasting the increase, I guess, in corporation tax and other things.
Right now, under you, tax take 24 to 25, 36.5% of GDP, rising to 36.8% in 2028-29. You can acknowledge that is going up, can't you?
I want your viewers to know is the taxes for them, because the whole taxation system of an economy is really complex.
So you won't answer it because you know it's going up?
No, not at all. I will look at those calculations. But what I do know is that for the viewers, that are here, that are listening, if you're a pensioner, if you vote for the Conservatives, you will not be taxed on your state pension. And if you're a working person, then your tax will come down under the Conservatives. It will not come down under Labour. That's the most important thing. Now, looking at some aspects of the overall taxation, which is much, much more complicated than that. For people who are paying tax today, they're the two most important differences that they need to make a choice on at this election on taxation.
Thank you very much, Gillian Keegan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, now turning to another election issue, the number of people coming in boats across the Channel, and those trying to reach this side has got to a record high, and the parties are talking about this again tomorrow, Nick. What are the latest?
That's right. So the Conservative Party, this is their big issue of the day tomorrow, talking about their Rwanda scheme and saying that provides a deterrent and claiming that Labour don't have a plan. Obviously, Labour would say we're going to go upstream and use counter-terrorism legislation to go after what they call the criminal gangs. But to counter that, in the last half an hour or so, Labour have released some figures, and they are saying that the number of people who've crossed the Channel in small boats since Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister will, within the next 24 hours, pass the 50,000 mark. And they're saying that that will happen just before he completes his 20th month as Prime Minister. And it took 35 months for Boris Johnson to reach that same total. The average number of arrivals under Rishi Sunak's watch, they say, is 575 a week. Under Boris Johnson, it was 404. But just to get an idea of how we reach these figures, we've done a little breakdown of the figures. And if we take a look at this graph we've compiled, it shows the figures comparing the last 6 months with previous 6 months of last year. So January to June 2023, 11,433 crossed. January to June this year, it's 12,901. The crucial thing about that is we haven't actually got the full June. We've only got up till yesterday, and on that basis, if you get the full June, then that is how eventually that gets you over the 50,000. Now, the Prime Minister was asked about this on the Sun, never mind the ballots debate with Harry Cole, and he was saying, no, the numbers are coming down. And the reason why he says they're coming down is that if you compare the previous 12 months, where we are now, back 12 months with the previous 12 months before that, then it's going down. But I mean, it's literally apples and pears.
Well, look,
on
John
one way
Curtis
it's going
is
up,
laughing
on another
at
way
that.
it's going down.
Mari Black is laughing at that. I didn't catch your expression, Joe Johnson, but why do you react like that, John Curtis, when Nick explains how the Tories explain?
Sure. I mean, basically, Nick is saying to us that it's better than it was 2 years ago, but it's worse than last year. Well, you know, but essentially the story that therefore emerges that this is a persistent problem, that so far the measures that have been passed by the government have not been particularly successful in reducing the number of people crossing the Channel. And the honest truth is that, you know, the history of asylum seeking is one whereby it is very difficult to stop the flow of asylum seekers, and it's in a sense by simply saying, well, we're going to try and draw up our drawbridge. The problem is that the underlying problem, which is the number of parts of the world where people are fleeing persecution or political difficulty of one kind or another, is so large that these folk are wanting to get across to here. And until that initial source problem is solved, probably neither a Conservative nor a Labour government is going to succeed in stopping the boats.
Mari Black, how do you view this contest between Labour and the Conservatives, which you can't argue with their motivation? They don't want to see people drown in the Channel. But the way the conversation and the discourse has run through this...
I mean, it's depressing, frankly, because...
But why is it depressing not to want to see people drown in the Channel?
Because I think that it's exposing the fact that behind this Stop the Boat slogan, there's not any real, you know, valued plan. There is nothing really practical about it. We've got to start looking at how we can open up safe routes again for people to enter the country. We have to start working with predominantly the EU as well. But right now, Britain seems obsessed with, you know, banging this Rule Britannia drum and, as John says, almost drawing up the drawbridge for everybody else. So it's just not healthy.
When you look at legal and illegal migration in terms of the figures to this country from last year, there were 30,000 people came across on boats. The government gave 1.44 million visas legally to people, which shows you the difference, even though so much attention is on illegal arrivals. What do you think, Joe Johnson, about the promise the Prime Minister made to stop the boats?
Well, I think it was misconceived or misjudged to make a promise to do something which he couldn't control. He raised the salience of an issue to which he didn't have a proper answer, and he's paying a very heavy price for it, because the Rwanda policy hasn't proved to be a deterrent, as everybody said would be the case.
I mean, that was obviously Boris Johnson's answer. It was his policy, wasn't it?
Yeah, but be that the reality is, Rishi Sunak made this the defining test of his premiership, and he is duly being judged on it.
Why do you think he did that?
He did that because he was worried about the leaching away of Conservative support to reform voters for whom illegal immigration is an extremely important issue.
The leaching, as you quite accurately call it, towards reform has primarily occurred since the government, as of last autumn, started to focus on the issue. And the problem is that because both legal immigration has proved to be a policy failure, so far as the government is concerned, illegal immigration has not proven to be particularly effective. Focusing on immigration, therefore, is not a wise strategy, because it's an issue on which the public, if they're concerned about the issue, either think you have failed, or in the case the other one half of the country, when it comes to Rwanda, think you're pursuing morally the wrong policy in the first place. So it's very, very difficult to turn it into a win-win issue.
Yeah, agreed. It was a poor strategy, poor political strategy.
There have been successive Home Secretaries who've used very dramatic rhetoric, and the rhetoric has been way ahead of the reality, and that is fundamentally why they're in trouble. Keir Starmer is coming up with what he regards as practical solutions. He doesn't regard it as dramatic rhetoric, but it's practical solutions, he would say, which are potentially giving the impression that he can solve something, and he may find, given that this is a global challenge and there are migrants travelling around Europe and coming, that he might well find that, yes, he's not using the dramatic language of Priti Patel and Suella Braverman, but he's outlining a practical plan, and he may find that it will be as challenging.
But also that dramatic language that has been getting used, that's the other reason why I find this so depressing, because it tacitly encourages and certainly condones a lot of dog whistle racist politics, and to see that taking hold throughout the UK in the last few years is depressing at best and horrifying at worst.
And you know there are politicians who would say to talk about illegal immigration is not a racist issue. Do you accept that or not?
If you want to have a serious conversation, yes, but you also can't then ignore the fact that race undoubtedly plays a massive role in how people perceive this problem and who people perceive the problem to be.
Well, earlier at the Sun event, I spoke to Labour's shadow cabinet minister, their shadow paymaster general, actually, Jonathan Ashworth, about the number of people crossing in small boats, what Labour's deterrent would be, and also tax. And this is what he had to say.
We have announced plans on VAT on private schools fees. We know that's a tough decision, but we think that we could raise money in order to put that money into state schools to recruit more teachers. We've said we want to close the non-dom tax loophole fully, so we can fund more appointments in our NHS and help bring waiting lists down. We've said we want to put a proper windfall tax on the big gas and oil companies, and that will allow us to invest in renewable energy sources and create 650,000 good, well-paid jobs and cut energy bills. We're not increasing income tax, we're not increasing VAT, we're not increasing national insurance or corporation tax.
Do you trust the Institute for Fiscal Studies?
I do trust the Institute for Fiscal.
Are you an honest politician?
It's up for the... Yeah, I think I am, but that's up to the voters to judge.
Well, the IFS today showed that total taxes as a share of GDP under a potential Labour government will rise to 37.4%. So as you trust the IFS, and as you say you're an honest politician, then you can say to Newsnight viewers, yes, under a Labour government, taxes will be going up.
But where I disagree with the IFS, and they're right to raise the state of the public finances, they have been wrecked under 14 years of the Conservatives, but where I part company from the IFS is, I am more ambitious for growth, and I think we can grow our economy by our industrial strategy, our energy policy, our planning reforms, our welfare reforms.
Why can't you just say it? So the IFS today says under a Labour government, the tax take will rise to 37.4% as a share of GDP. It's under 37% at the moment. So it's going up. That's the trajectory. Why can't you just say it out loud?
Because on this point, I disagree with them, right? And respecting them and being honest does not contradict disagreeing respectfully with an organisation. So they're taking a snapshot of where the public finances are, given what they expect a potential Labour government to inherit, but they are not making the projections on what we think we can do on economic growth. Because we're going to reform planning to get things built in this country. We're going to reform welfare to get people back to work. Actually, fixing the NHS helps people, because those who are out of work because of sickness can go back to work. So we've got a set of policies that we believe will grow the economy. That means the state of the public finances...
Well, let's turn it around the other way then. Let's turn it around the other way. So is the tax take going to come down as a share of GDP under a potential Labour government?
If you improve growth, that improves the state of the public finances. And Rachel Reeves has said her instinct is she does want to see tax come down on working people. But I'm not going to offer false promises on taxation.
Right. So you can't say, you can't...
Because I'm an honest politician, as you...
Well, so you say.
Well, that's why I'm giving you an honest answer. I'm not going to give false promises.
You're not being straight.
I am being straight when I say I'm not going to give false promises. Usually you get politicians giving false promises. I'm saying I'm not doing that. We've said where we're going to raise it.
You won't say the tax take will go up, which is what the IFS says, and you won't say the tax take will come down.
No. Hang on. As you said, I'm an honest politician. We've said we're going to put VAT on school fees, that we're going to do a windfall tax on gas and oil. We're going to close the non-dom. So they are taxation changes. We're being honest with the British public on that. But if you improve growth, you improve the state of the public finances as well.
Keir Starmer tonight seemed to struggle with the question, what would a Labour government's deterrent to stop people getting in boats be?
Well, the Rwanda scheme is not a deterrent.
What would your deterrent be?
Well, we're going to send people back. We're going to process people's claims, and we're going to get on with processing people's claims. And those people who shouldn't be here, when they come from countries like Bangladesh or wherever, we're going to send them back.
But why would that stop people getting into boats?
Because at the moment, they come over here, they know Rwanda only deals with 1%. The rest stay in a hotel for the rest of their lives. That's a big flashing incentive to come here. Whereas we're saying that rather than sending flights to Rwanda, we're going to be sending flights to all the countries that these people came from by sending people back.
Well, most asylum seekers, according to official figures, come from Afghanistan and Iran. You're not suggesting to voters that you'll get a returns agreement with the Taliban and with the Iranian regime.
But we're talking about people like that. We've got people coming from Albania, from India, from Bangladesh.
But you just literally ignored the two countries where most asylum seekers come from. You're not going to get a returns agreement.
Big proportion is India, Bangladesh, Albania. We need to deal with those
And you're still
countries.
ignoring Afghanistan and Iran. Are you saying you're going to get returns agreements with those two countries?
Well, you look at each one on its merits, obviously.
But at the
moment,
I thought you were an honest politician.
I am an honest politician, so I'm giving you an answer.
Are you saying you're going to get a returns agreement with the Taliban?
We can get returns agreement. Well, that's a different set. The Taliban and Afghanistan is a different setup.
Correct. And I'm asking you, are you going to get a returns agreement?
And I'm giving you practical examples of where we believe we can deal with these problems. Because at the moment, people coming here from the Indian subcontinent, do not get returned. They get put up in hotels and they can stay in these hotels for the rest of their lives. That's the Tory policy. So when we say we're going to get flights off, we're going to get flights taking people back to countries like this where we get returns agreements. We're not going to put our hands in the air and say, oh, no, we can't do it. Sorry, we've got to deal with this issue.
Thank you very much for talking to Newsnight. Thank you. Right, let's have a look at some of the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers. The Guardian, lead with low wage growth, has pushed 900,000 children into poverty. Next, we've got the FT. Tory and Labour pledges to improve public services are essentially unfunded. That's the think tank, the verdict from the think tank, the IFS. Daily Mail, obsessed Holly fan plotted rape and murder. The Daily Telegraph, Scotland Yard leaked the names in the Tory betting scandal. The Times, conversion therapy to be banned by Labour. And the Daily Record, change is coming and Scotland can be a part of it. So for the first time since 2010, we are asking our readers to vote Labour, and they explain why the Record is backing Sir Keir Starmer inside. You might remember that last week on Newsnight we talked about whether the Sun would back Labour at this election and whether it really mattered. Well, I grabbed a few words with the Sun's political editor Harry Cole after their debate tonight, and Rebecca Brooks, the CEO of News UK. They own the Sun, and when I say a few words, I actually do mean a few words.
Thursday first, yeah?
Oh no, because I've got to go soon. Is the Sun going to come out for Labour?
You have to buy the paper every day, watch Never Mind the Ballots, and you'll be the first person to know.
And what about yourself?
I agree with Harry.
Okay. So they weren't ruling it in and they weren't ruling it out. I think you could be say about that.
Answer, didn't it?
Absolutely like a politician's answer. What about the national backing Labour?
The Daily Record.
I mean, the Record, I beg your pardon. I'm so sorry, the Record. I'm sorry.
I mean, it's one of the least surprising things if you've been following the Daily Record. But I question how much things like that actually influence the electorate. And I'm cautious when I say that, because undoubtedly there is an element of influence. But on the whole, when I'm talking to people in Scotland, quite a few seem to have either made their mind up, and the ones that are undecided I doubt they'll be swayed by a newspaper headline.
Sure. And in terms of voters, John Curtis, these days, I mean, who buys a hard copy of a newspaper?
No, and the honest truth...
I suppose psychologically for parties.
I mean, and remember that newspapers often follow their readers rather than necessarily vice versa. I mean, the reason why we're speculating about the Sun is that given the political disposition, can the Sun afford to continue to back the Conservatives, given that many of its readers will not be happy? The Daily Record is a traditional Labour party north of the border, and the fact that it's gone back to Labour, frankly, as Murray has already said, isn't really much of a surprise. And I doubt it's going to make much difference.
Psychologically, when a paper like The Sun comes out for one party or another, what does it mean to that party?
No, a huge boost. But I think the Conservative campaign, looking at those headlines today, will be pleased that the betting story was only on one of the papers that you showed, I think The Telegraph, and probably in a light which they might draw some comfort from.
I used to work in newspapers. The one thing newspaper proprietors are terrified of are their readers, and they don't want to be on the wrong side of them.
No, and they keep on losing them, so they're even more, have to be nurtured even more now.
Yeah. I'm very happy that we're not terrified of our viewers, so that's good. Thank you very much, all of you. Really appreciate you being with us today. Nick, as always, thank you. That's it from us. Thank you for watching. I'm back tomorrow. See you then. Sorry, I don't know why I